Now, the neoconservative war agenda, of course, did not stop with Iraq. After the occupation of Iraq, the neoconservatives expected to take on Iran, Syria, and other Middle Eastern countries. I might say they even had a place for Saudi Arabia, which they wanted to destabilize. And of course, this fit with all that talk in maybe 2004, 2005 about democracy in the Middle East. Well, of course, this was democracy to undermine these definitely autocratic regimes, but attempting to establish democracy. You'd have a democracy somewhat like what exists in current-day Iraq, in which you have a lot of groups fighting among each other. The neocons termed all this World War IV, which World War III would have been the Cold War. So they saw this a major undertaking that the United States had to do, just like they believed World War I, World War II, and the Cold War, and the threat of Islam, which they saw as almost a monolithic entity. In others, the general view is, Saddam and Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Republic of Iran really disliked each other and fought each other. But the neocons said, that may be true, but they're all unified in their hatred to the West. And that might be true, but the conventional view would be these countries really are too weak to threaten the United States. Now, throughout the latter part of my book, The Transparent Cabal, I show how the neoconservatives tried but failed to get the United States into a war with Iran. They failed due to the opposition of the same groups I mentioned before, the State Department bureaucracy. The military didn't want to attack Iran. Outside of government, the traditional foreign policy elite was against it. And this time, unlike in their attack on Iraq, the American people's desire for war was weaker. Yes, they were angry after 2001 and wanted to strike out at someone, but this feeling had lessened. And also, more Americans were skeptical about wars. Since America had been bogged down in Iraq, they didn't want the same thing to happen in another war. So, for these reasons, the neoconservatives were unable to achieve a war with Iran, though had there been some type of incident, and I think many times the Bush administration tried to provoke such an incident with Iran, maybe the neoconservatives would have achieved their goal of a war with Iran. Now, what does all this mean now with the new Obama administration? The neocons are, Bush and Cheney are gone. The neoconservatives no longer are in the administration in power. They're out of power. The neocons, of course, have championed John McCain. And had he won, they'd be riding high, but he lost. Obama's considered a man of peace. The belief is that he will radically change Bush's Middle East policy. When he went to Cairo, he was almost talking as if he was a Muslim. Very, very favorable view of the Islamic states and the religion of Islam. Now, are the neocons simply past history? To what extent are their policies relevant for understanding American Middle East policy today? Well, fundamentally, I would say it seems obvious that it is difficult to undo what they've done. Everyone, I guess, has noted that the United States is not out of Iraq. Yes, the talk is that, we're reducing troops or something, but the troops are still there. Iraq, of course, borders on Iran. The United States is also in Afghanistan, which likewise borders on Iran. Border incidents could always occur, which could spiral into outright war. And such incidents are quite likely, since members of the war party, especially the neocons, have been screaming that Iran has been aiding the terrorists in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Should something bad happen to American troops, should large numbers be somehow killed in some way, certainly there'd be a hue and cry that this were done by the instigation of Iran. It's conceivable that pressure popular pressure could force Obama to make a move against Iran that could spiral into a major war. We also have it that Iran claims that the various terror attacks that are taking place within its boundaries are sponsored by the United States, and to some extent this is true. It could be that some Revolutionary Guards or something would pursue the terrorists that go cross borders into Iran, would pursue them into Iraq or Afghanistan, and there could be some type of conflict with American troops. So the fact that American troops and Iran are just right next to each other always leads to the possibility of some incident that will lead to war. And of course, it's also heightened by the concerns about Iran's nuclear program, which are especially being pushed by Israel and its lobby in the United States. I might say that Israel, while it did push for war in Iraq, the Israeli government is much more vociferous, pushing for warlike policies against Iran. And I might point out that war could take place not simply through an immediate United States attack on Iran, but even such policies as a naval blockade to enforce sanctions. A blockade of a country's coast is considered to be an act of war. Iran might feel it necessary to, as a desperate action, to do something about it, especially since our ships are quite vulnerable to some of their missiles that they've been getting from the Soviet Union and China. Of course, the United States would come back and destroy them, but they certainly would be tempted to do something like that if there were a U.S. naval blockade. So the upshot of all of this is that there's still, even under Obama, a strong possibility of a war with Iran. And the United States would not be in that position had it not for the neoconservatives initiating their war agenda in the Bush II administration. Now, I think it is only by understanding the real motivation for the American war policy in the Middle East that people who oppose these wars can really successfully prevent future wars from taking place in the region. Well, thank you very much. And now if you have questions, I'd like to try to answer them. I hope you didn't find that as being too long and boring. I tried to keep it down, but it was hard to get in what I thought to be my key points and